The stale air of the logistics annex, heavy with the composite scent of new nylon webbing, desiccated MRE components, and the faint metallic tang of uncleaned bore, was the exact definition of a bureaucracy made physical. Corporal Silva, her utility uniform faded to an indistinguishable moss green, stood silently at the quartermaster's counter, the handle of her industrial-grade mop resting against the worn laminate floor. She was awaiting authorization for 2 gallons of degreaser and a new brass polishing kit, requisitions long overdue and now subject to the bureaucratic whim of the man seated behind the plexiglass partition. Sergeant Huntington, supply, was not a man who ever had dirt under his fingernails. His camouflage was pristine, his boots held a showroom sheen, and the faint citrus scent of his aftershave seemed an insult to the working grime that clung to everything else in the building. He tapped a manicured finger against the pending digital request on his monitor, a theatrical gesture of deep consideration, designed solely to extend the power differential. Cabo Silva, Huntington drawled, deliberately mispronouncing the Portuguese word for corporal, elongating the first syllable into a mocking whine. You've checked box 3, subsection A, which specifies heavy-duty alkaline degreaser. I see here you're requesting this for the general mess hall floors, correct? Silva's voice was low, almost swallowed by the ambient hum of the fluorescent lights. Affirmative, Sergeant. The grease trap overflowed yesterday. Standard cleaning solution won't penetrate the residue. Huntington leaned back in his ergonomic chair, a posture radiating casual dismissal. I find that improbable. I approved 12 liters of general-purpose solvent just last week. Are you suggesting, Cabo, that you are inefficient in its application? Or perhaps, he smirked, adjusting the collar of his uniform jacket, a jacket that had never seen a moment of real operational stress, that the help needs specialty chemicals to perform standard custodial duties? The word, help, fell into the silence like a casing striking concrete. It was not the first time Huntington had used it. Silva felt the familiar hot tension behind her eyes. It was a tension born not of anger, but of the crushing effort required to contain the lifetime of service that designation so brutally dismissed. She swallowed, her gaze fixed on the requisition form. Sergeant, the M-Pro 7 solvent is designed for light residue. This is motor oil and cooking grease. It requires a different chemical agent. If I don't clear it tonight, the inspection tomorrow will fail the entire East Wing barracks. Huntington sighed dramatically, pulling a pen, a luxury polished metal pen, from his breast pocket. He theatrically circled the requested line item on a printed manifest. Denied. Refile under standard consumables. If your technique is lacking, that is a training issue, not a supply issue. We don't waste taxpayer money on premium solvents because the maintenance crew can't push a mop effectively. He pushed the manifest back across the counter, tapping the glass. Now take the mop and move along. I have actual logistical matters to attend to, not managing your soap inventory. Silva simply nodded, picking up the refused paperwork. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She did not point out that she was fully authorized to request the necessary materials under the current General Order 4B. She just accepted the injustice, the quiet, persistent humiliation that had defined the last 3 years of her assignment. Her knuckles tightened briefly around the wooden handle of the mop, an act of purely physical restraint. She turned, walking away from the counter, the squeak of her worn boots the only sound, moving toward the shadows near the storage shelves where the industrial equipment was kept. As she walked, her focus drifted, the sharp memory of the insult blurring the edges of the brightly lit corridor, the smell of the chemicals, the reference to inefficiency, the sheer administrative weight of the moment. It all dissolved, replaced by a different atmosphere, a different smell, a different kind of burden. The sun in Helmand Province, August of 3 years prior, did not merely shine. It compressed the air into a heavy, vibrating shimmer that stole breath and energy equally. The air tasted of fine grit, diesel fumes, and the sickeningly sweet scent of burnt vegetation. Silva, then a specialist attached to a reconnaissance unit outside Fob Chapman, was draped prone across the dusty, sun-baked roof of a dilapidated mud-brick compound, the heat bleeding through her camis despite the insulation layer. Her focus was not on the heat, nor the exhaustion that had been building for 72 consecutive hours of low-level harassment and surveillance. Her focus was entirely on the glass, specifically the 5-25 Vig 56mm Schmidt and Bender PM2 scope, fixed atop the heavy, glorious chassis of the Barrett M107A1. The Barrett was not a rifle. It was a mobile artillery piece disguised as a direct fire system. Chambered in the massive 50 BMG, 12.7 Sunday 9mm NATO, the weapon weighed 31 pounds unloaded. She felt every ounce of that weight distributed across her shoulders and hips, braced into a meticulously engineered bipod position. Her left hand was not on the foregrip. It was cupping the heel of the buttstock, micro-adjusting the elevation, a technique honed through thousands of hours of range time, compensating for the rifle's tendency to jump slightly after the firing cycle. She had eyes on a dry riverbed, nearly 18-20 meters away. This was not a training range. This was a critical engagement zone, a high-traffic choke point for the patrol currently moving through the low valley. Her team leader, Sergeant Major Kalin, along with Doc Patel, Lieutenant Evans, and PFC Reynolds, 4 essential lives, were moving toward the rally point when the dust flared, and the distinct muted sound of sustained heavy small arms fire began to echo off the canyon walls. They were caught in a classic L-shaped ambush, pinned down behind a thin, cracked concrete wall. Silva had only minutes, maybe seconds, before the 4-man enemy crew, visibly identified by the telltale white puffs of dust kicked up around their position, managed to zero in their PKM machine gun. Range, 1823 meters. Her spotter, Sergeant Davies, whispered into the comms, his voice tight. Windage, 7 knots, consistent, cross-canyon, right to left. Temp, 45 Celsius. Density altitude reading is spiking, specialist. Silva didn't need the exact numbers read out. They were already hardwired into her operational memory. She was doing the complex calculation in real time, integrating the environmental factors into the ballistic drop tables she had mentally internalized. This was the difference between a successful shot and a catastrophic miss. At 1823 meters, gravity would claim the half-inch diameter projectile brutally. The drop was enormous, measured in several hundred inches. But more esoteric factors had to be accounted for, variables that separated the average sniper from the operational master. First, spin, drift. The rifling of the barrel imparted a right-hand spin on the bullet. As the projectile traveled, this spin generated aerodynamic lift, like a miniature gyroscope, pushing the bullet slightly right. At this extreme range, the drift was measurable and necessary to compensate for. Second, the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself. While often dismissed in closer ranges, at 1.8 kilometers and factoring in the time of flight, approximately 2.7 seconds for the 50 BMG round, the rotation of the planet beneath the bullet path generated a minute but critical shift. They were shooting generally west to east. The rotation would shift the target infinitesimally. Third, atmospheric density. The high temperature and thin air meant the bullet experienced less drag than it would at sea level, requiring a fractional downward adjustment to the calculated elevation hold. Silva ignored the sweat stinging her eyes. She ignored the pounding of her heart against the hard ground. She focused only on the bubble level mounted on the rail, ensuring the rifle was perfectly level, eliminating any cant that would introduce disastrous horizontal error. "Davies, give me the hold," she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos filtering through the radio. "Hold is 18 mils up. 2 clicks right windage for spin and cross. Adjusting for DA and Coriolis. I need 3 clicks right," Silva corrected, her internal calculations overriding Davies's more conservative estimate. "The heat haze is amplifying the perceived crosswind drag. The bullet will travel flatter." She confirmed the scope adjustments, the tactile clicks of the turrets a comforting, absolute assurance. She settled her cheek onto the cold polymer stock, inhaling deeply, then slowly exhaling 2/3 of the air, holding the final third. The world narrowed to the sight picture. The 4 enemy fighters were visible now, clustered behind a low rock wall, their PKM operator leaning over the top, spitting fire and tracer rounds toward Kalin's position. Silva did not aim at the man. She aimed at the receiver of the PKM, the core of the threat. She focused on her trigger finger. The movement had to be perfect, a slow, continuous press straight back, applying force until the sear broke, minimizing any physical movement that could throw off the trajectory by the width of a hair. Her world went silent. The ambush, the screaming radio, the heat, all disappeared. Press. The world shattered. The report of the M107A1 was an obscene physical blow, a sound wave that hammered her eardrums even through the doubled protection of earplugs and tactical headset. The recoil, managed expertly by the Barrett's massive muzzle brake and proprietary buffering system, still jarred her entire skeleton, momentarily lifting her off the compound roof. Through the white flash and concussive shock, she immediately regained the sight picture. The heavy rifle design allowed her to cycle the weapon and reacquire the target zone in time to witness the impact. The 50 caliber projectile, traveling at more than 2,800 feet per second, struck the machine gun's receiver block precisely where Silva intended. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The enormous kinetic energy transfer shredded the weapon system, the heavy recoil spring, the feeding mechanism, the barrel shroud, turning the critical components into shrapnel. The entire weapon exploded violently backward, incapacitating the PKM operator instantly. But the fight wasn't over. Two of the remaining fighters, startled by the sudden terrifying strike, began to scatter. The fourth enemy combatant, however, a rifleman equipped with an AK-47, was taking aim at the exposed flank of Lieutenant Evans. He was about to step from behind cover. Silva, adrenaline surging, racked the heavy bolt. Clack shunk, ejecting the still-smoking casing and loading a new round, a task that felt impossibly slow, yet was executed in under 1.5 seconds. She adjusted her sight picture instantly. The target was moving laterally, sprinting. The range was the same, but the lead calculation was now paramount. She had to place the crosshairs not where the enemy was, but where he would be in 2.7 seconds. "New threat, high-value target," Davies screamed. "Evans is exposed." Silva ignored the panic in Davies's voice. She calculated the lead, 2 body lengths, maybe 2.5 meters ahead of the sprinting fighter. It was a guess, refined by instinct and muscle memory acquired through years of punishing training simulations. She held her breath. Press. The second concussion was just as brutal. This time, when the debris cleared, the target was down, neutralized mid-stride. The third and fourth enemy fighters, realizing they were being systematically eliminated by an invisible, impossibly accurate long-range threat, broke contact and fled into the broken terrain. Silva remained prone for another 2 minutes, her body shaking, sweat plastering her uniform to her skin. Her ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine. The silence that followed the ambush was absolute, broken only by the distant, frantic chatter of her surviving patrol team confirming their status. 4 lives saved: Sergeant Major Kalin, LT, Evans, Doc Patel, and PFC Reynolds. They emerged from the valley unscathed. The mission was successful. The paperwork, however, was immense. The debriefing stretched over 2 days. The ballistics reports, the official combat logs, the photographic evidence of the weapon neutralization at nearly 2 kilometers. It was all scrutinized, verified, and eventually, reluctantly approved up the chain of command. The level of operational skill required was deemed extraordinary and above the call of duty. She was nominated. 3 months later, she received the Silver Star, the nation's 3rd highest combat decoration, specifically cited for valor in high-risk, long-range counter-sniping operations under duress. The official citation highlighted the complexity of the calculation and the sheer physical fortitude required to deliver 2 perfectly placed rounds back-to-back at extreme distance. But the deployment was taxing. The physical stress of the Barrett, the constant adrenaline spikes, and the trauma of witnessing the gruesome reality of her actions, even when justified, had taken a profound toll. After 2 more tours, compounded by persistent unyielding knee pain exacerbated by carrying the heavy weapon systems across treacherous terrain, Silva accepted a medical downgrade. Her career in special operations was over. She did not seek the fame or the parades. She accepted the reassignment quietly, trading the weight of the Barrett M107A1 for the familiar lighter burden of administrative maintenance. She was transferred stateside, relegated to the maintenance pool, where the quiet predictability was a necessary balm for her frayed nerves and aching joints. She took the rank demotion willingly, moving from specialist to cabo, corporal, accepting the duties of a janitor in the massive, centralized command structure, preferring the anonymity of a mop and bucket to the spotlight of a scope. She kept her medals tucked away in a small, unmarked box in her locker. She found that the greatest protection she could afford herself was the assumption that she was unimportant, invisible. The fluorescent lights of the logistics annex snapped Silva back to the present. The smell of dust and floor wax replaced the smell of cordite and high desert air. She was standing next to the mop sink, her head throbbing faintly from the sudden transition. Sergeant Huntington's voice, sharp and nasal, cut through her concentration. He was standing just outside the supply cage, leaning against the counter, addressing a junior enlisted airman who had approached him for a simple request. "And you, airman, better make sure you wipe down that truck bay correctly. I saw your vehicle detail sheet. Looked like a grease monkey was handling the cleaning. We maintain standards here. We aren't running a salvage yard. If you can't achieve operational cleanliness, you'll be down here fetching soap with—" Huntington glanced dismissively toward Silva, now preparing her bucket. "With the rest of the custodial crew. Keep the standards high, airman. We can't have the help setting a poor example." The deliberate, cruel emphasis on the help was a direct jab. The airman, sensing the tension, quickly grabbed his paperwork and departed. Huntington turned his full attention back to Silva, a petty tyrant savoring his final moments of undisputed authority. "And you, Cabo. I noticed you lingering by the storage racks. You know the policy. No unauthorized loitering in classified storage zones. If you have an issue with the approved solvents, you need to follow the proper grievance channels. Don't stand around daydreaming." He gestured toward her worn boots. "Get those floors cleaned, and make sure the brass on Admiral Thorne's plaque is shining. He'll be arriving any minute, and he expects perfection. Unlike some low-grade maintenance personnel, the Admiral understands the concept of dedication to detail." He had finally crossed the invisible line. It wasn't the refusal of supplies or the rank insult. It was the attempt to connect her silent, dedicated work, the one thing keeping her mind anchored, to a lack of respect or discipline, while simultaneously invoking the name of a true operator for comparison. Silva didn't look up, but her jaw tightened. The blood that had been spilled for her to stand anonymously in this sterile logistics annex suddenly felt very real and very heavy. Just as Huntington was puffing up to deliver another condescending order, the automatic glass doors at the far end of the annex slid open with a controlled whoosh. A sudden, deep silence descended upon the entire hangar. It wasn't just a break in conversation. It was the immediate, total cessation of movement that happens when true, unassailable command authority enters a shared space. Vice Admiral Elias Thorne was not a large man, but he carried the kind of presence that forced the atmosphere to yield to him. He was one of the Navy's most decorated leaders, a former SEAL DevGru commander who had transitioned into high-level strategic administration. He was moving quickly, flanked by two sharp-suited aides and a stern Master Chief, his gaze sweeping the room with an economy of motion that instantly cataloged every individual, every piece of clutter, and every deviation from protocol. His uniform was impeccably tailored, 3 rows of ribbons visible against the deep blue fabric. But what drew the eye, besides the 4 stars on his shoulder boards, was the casual, yet absolute familiarity with which he carried his personal kit. Slung across his chest, secured by a single-point nylon strap, was an assault rifle. It was an HK-4016, the weapon of choice for the most elite units globally. It wasn't standard issue for an admiral, making its presence highly unusual, a statement in itself. The rifle was meticulously maintained, its finish a flat operational black, detailed with custom modifications, a testament to operational fidelity. It was his signature. Admiral Thorne paused, his procession halting exactly 10 feet from the logistics counter where Huntington was still posturing. Huntington's face, which seconds before had been flushed with arrogance, drained rapidly to the color of wet plaster. He snapped to attention, executing a salute so sharp it looked painful. "Vice Admiral, sir. Sergeant Huntington. Supply and logistics, sir. Welcome to the annex." Admiral Thorne did not return the salute immediately. His eyes, the color of cold slate, passed over Huntington, registering his panicked, polished perfection, and then drifted. They landed on Cabo Silva, who was still standing by the mop sink, hands wrapped around the wooden handle, the embodiment of overlooked maintenance. Thorne tilted his head slightly. He saw the dirty uniform, the posture of quiet exhaustion, and the mop. He also saw the way she held herself, not slumped, but defensively contained, like a spring coiled too tightly. The Admiral's voice, when he finally spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the silence with the effortless authority of a command wave. "Sergeant Huntington, stand down, at ease." Huntington's salute wavered, then dropped clumsily. He was visibly trembling. Thorne then addressed Silva, his eyes locking onto hers. The gaze was probing, direct, and completely devoid of judgment. "Corporal," he began, his tone neutral. "What is your current duty assignment?" Silva immediately dropped the mop and snapped to a rigid attention, the muscle memory ingrained deep beneath the fatigue. "Maintenance, Vice Admiral. General cleaning and upkeep of Barracks East, sir." Thorne nodded slowly. taking in her current status. Then, a faint smile, almost imperceptible, touched the corner of his mouth. It was a smile of profound historical irony. "And your rank, Corporal?" Thorne asked, his voice now carrying a hint of wry amusement. The question was clearly rhetorical, a subtle test of the atmosphere Huntington had created. Before Silva could answer with the obvious Cabo, Thorne's eyes drifted to the name tag on her chest, then swept down her chest, pausing briefly over the space where the ribbons, if worn, would reside. He saw only the faded utility green. "I am told this installation relies on many layers of command, Corporal," Thorne continued, his voice deepening, the amusement fading, replaced by something heavier: recognition. From the highest administrative echelons down to the vital maintenance required to keep the structure sound. "Who, Corporal, do you report to?" Huntington, seizing a chance to insert himself back into the conversation, piped up, his voice cracking slightly. "Sir, she reports to me for supply requisitions, and her direct supervisor is Master Sergeant Rooker, Custodial Services. She is merely—" Thorne silenced him with a single, sharp look that managed to convey an entire career of operational disapproval. The look felt like a physical assault to Huntington. Thorne returned his attention to Silva. "Forget the chain of command, Corporal. What is your actual rank in the hierarchy of absolute necessity?" Silva hesitated, confused by the philosophical shift in the question. Thorne provided the answer himself, his voice dropping to a gravelly, resonant tone that filled the massive hangar. "Considering the critical importance of maintaining order and operational readiness across an entire fleet installation, I believe your effective rank, Corporal, is Fleet Commander." The title, absurd in the context of her mop and bucket, was delivered with absolute conviction. It was the Admiral's way of saying, "I see your work, and I value it above the paperwork." He took one measured step closer to the counter, his gaze still fixed on Silva. He then turned to Huntington, ignoring his existence entirely, and spoke to his accompanying Master Chief. "Master Chief, I need to enter the tactical readiness meeting and I can't carry my primary system in there. This HK-416 is tuned to my specifications. I will not trust its calibration to any armorers on site. I need someone competent, someone I can trust with this responsibility, to secure it until I return." The Master Chief immediately stepped forward. "Sir, I can—" Thorne cut him off, his movement smooth and deliberate. He began to unclip the sling of the HK-416 from his body. This was not a standard-issue M4. This was a weapon personally maintained by a Vice Admiral who had spent 2 decades kicking down doors. It was a sacred object, a tool of the highest operational craft. To touch it, to hold it, was to be granted profound trust. Thorne unslung the rifle completely, cradling it in his arms for a moment. He looked past Huntington, whose face was now frozen in a rictus of bewilderment and fear, and walked directly toward Cabo Silva. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. The smell of the weapon, clean oil, faint traces of burnt powder and steel, wafted toward her. "Corporal Silva," Thorne said, using her name for the first time. "You look like a woman who knows what true precision looks like. A weapon is only as useful as the hands that hold it, and the mind that guides them. I have an important request." He extended the HK-416, buttstock first, toward her. The action was slow, deliberate, heavy with symbolic meaning. "I need you to hold this for me. Guard it. Ensure it remains secure and untouched. Can I trust you with the most critical piece of equipment I own?" Silva's breath hitched. Her hands, still stained with cleaning chemicals, slowly reached out. She accepted the weight of the rifle, the precise, balanced weight of the combat-proven machine. The cold steel of the magazine against her palm felt instantly, intimately familiar. The rough texture of the forward rail against her fingertips was muscle memory awakened. The sound of the HK-416 resting in her hands was the only sound in the annex. It was a profound, shocking silence. Huntington's jaw hung open. He looked from the 4-star Admiral to the janitor holding the highly restricted weapon and back again. The reality of the scene was so violently opposed to his understanding of the military hierarchy that his mind struggled to process it. Thorne nodded, a look of perfect satisfaction on his face. He reached out and gently tapped the silver star ribbon pinned discreetly beneath the folds of her uniform collar, a gesture so fast and precise that only Silva and the Admiral would have noticed it, a subtle acknowledgement of what he already knew. "Now, Sergeant Huntington." Thorne turned, his attention finally settling on the supply clerk. and the full weight of his 4 stars bore down. "I have a question for you." Huntington visibly flinched. "Sir?" When Corporal Silva was detailed for her current assignment, she was required to file a comprehensive personnel manifest. Standard procedure. "Did you, Sergeant, perhaps access that file?" Huntington stammered, scrambling for a bureaucratic defense. I am authorized, sir, for all personnel in the logistical support chain." "Excellent," Thorne said, his voice dangerously smooth. "Then you must have seen the record. Tell me, Sergeant, exactly what decorations does Cabo Silva hold?" Huntington's eyes darted frantically between the Admiral's unwavering gaze and Silva, who now stood impossibly still, the elite rifle resting easily in her grasp, her posture having subtly shifted from tired maintenance worker to coiled security professional. "Sir, I see the duty status report, sir. She is currently classified as low-level maintenance. Her prior service records are sealed, sir, by procedure." "Procedure," Thorne repeated, a hint of steel entering his voice. "I am very familiar with procedure, Sergeant. What you mean to say is that you didn't bother to read the manifest. You categorized this corporal by the mop in her hand, not the service in her history." Thorne then stepped back, addressing the entire room, the scattered clerks, the technicians, and the now utterly defeated supply sergeant. "Let me be clear on the value of the personnel who sustain this organization. This is not just Corporal Silva. This soldier earned her place in our ranks not by bureaucratic maneuver, but by cold, hard operational skill. She wears the Silver Star." The air crackled. The Silver Star, the highest level of recognized bravery short of the Medal of Honor, earned for extraordinary valor in combat. Thorne paused, letting the information sink into Huntington's rapidly deteriorating composure. He then began to recite the key details of the citation, his voice resonating with an unassailable authority, painting the picture of the ambush 3 years ago with cinematic clarity. On August 14th, 3 years prior, while deployed in the Helmand River Valley, then Specialist Silva secured 4 lives who were pinned down by heavy enemy machine gun fire at a distance exceeding 1,800 meters. The engagement required immediate, precise neutralization of the threat under extreme environmental duress, with less than 4 seconds for calculation. She delivered 2 rounds from a Barrett M107A1. The first round destroyed the enemy's PKM system. The second neutralized a high-value rifleman mid-sprint, saving Lieutenant Evans from catastrophic exposure. Thorne looked directly at Huntington, whose face was now slick with sweat, his pristine uniform suddenly looking absurdly out of place. "Sergeant, you called this decorated hero, this soldier who performed ballistic calculations at 1.8 kilometers and saved 4 of our own. You called her the help. You denied her the necessary solvent to perform her duty, accusing her of inefficiency, and dismissed her service record because she chose the quiet path." Huntington tried to speak, but only a choked gasp escaped. Thorne stepped closer, his demeanor changing from formal recital to cold personal judgment. "You see the mop. I see the woman who stabilized a patrol unit at near 2 kilometers. I see the discipline required to hold this." He nodded toward the HK-416 now resting securely in Silva's grasp, "and the focus required to maintain the readiness of an entire installation. That, Sergeant, is why she is capable of protecting my primary weapon, and why you will immediately approve her requisition for heavy-duty alkaline degreaser." He turned back to the stunned corporal. "Corporal Silva, that rifle belongs to you until I return. Do not let anyone touch it." Silva, her eyes bright with a mixture of shock and fierce pride, dipped her head slightly. "Understood, Vice Admiral." "Secured." Thorne gave a final firm nod, then turned and walked rapidly toward the conference room doors, his aides scrambling to catch up. The Master Chief lingered for a moment, giving a respectful, almost reverent nod to Silva before following his admiral. Huntington was left alone behind the counter, staring at the mop sink, the requisition forms, and the corporal, who now guarded an admiral's highly classified weapons system. His perfect veneer of bureaucratic superiority had been violently stripped away. He was pale, trembling not from cold, but from the realization of the massive, irrevocable error he had just made, the error of measuring worth by title instead of by sacrifice. He was reduced to nothing but a supply sergeant who had mocked a decorated veteran. He silently, mechanically, accessed the requisition system, his hands shaking so violently he struggled to hit the correct keys. He approved the M-Pro 7 solvent, the degreaser, and even added an extra allotment of the high-grade brass polish. He looked up at Silva, but she wasn't watching him. She was looking down the length of the HK-416, her expression neutral, focused. She was no longer a janitor. She was a sentry, guarding a piece of operational history, fully validated and recognized not by her current administrative classification, but by the weight of her earned, bloody history. The supply room was silent once more, but the silence now carried the deep echoing significance of an honor restored. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.